learning the instructions of God, part 5, and which we are going to go over the commandments that God has laid out for all of us in the Torah, in the first 5 books of the Bible. And so the listing that we're going to go through is all of those commandments or instructions, which that's what the Torah means. It means instructions that are applying to your daily life today. All those for the average person, the person who is not a Levite priest and not living in the land, that is in exile, that is following Christ also. These commandments all apply to you, and we're going to arrive at a number at the end of this series. Why don't we just jump right in? And we're picking up from number 120, and that is Leviticus 19, verse 18, not to bear a grudge or not to take vengeance on another. It's very important because in all the movies that we watch or music we listen to, there's this worldly aspect that you have to hold a grudge, you have to have enemies, you have to get revenge. The Bible speaks against it. God is the only one who takes revenge, and so you shall not avenge. That's the first words of this verse. Nor bear any grudge against the children of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself, for I am Jehovah. I am Jehovah in English. And so this is where we get treat people the way that you want to be treated. Love your neighbor as yourself. The golden rule. So you're not to have this hate in your heart, this bitterness, this grudge, this anger. You're not to have any of that. It's the opposite of love. The Bible says you're to love your neighbor. You're not to hate your neighbor. That's the opposite of loving. Number 121, Leviticus 19, verse 19. Not to sow diverse kinds of seed in one's field. Now, there's a lot of confusion with this verse. I hope to clear it up. This verse is dealing with ripping people off by putting poorer grain in with bad grain or bad quality grain and selling it as good quality grain. This verse has to do with cheating people. It's a little more clear in the Hebrew, but in the English, this is what it says. You shall keep my statutes. You shall not let your cattle gender with diverse kinds. You shall not sow your field with mingled seed. That means you're to plant it completely even when you plant it. You're so that they're not crossing each other and making good grain bad and bad grain good. One of the examples is I planted purple basil and green basil next to each other, and they started crisscrossing, and you got green basil with purple and purple growing green in there, and it's a mess. And I'm losing the quality of both of them. Neither shall you garment mingle of linen and of wool come upon you. So that second half of the verse is very specific. It's referring to something that was a clothing or a specific type of clothing at that time. And we have other verses that will go with it, but we don't have clarity on what that piece of clothing was. There's a specific word being used in the Hebrew. It's not that you can't have different clothing mixtures, but there was a specific type of clothing probably the Canaanites were wearing, and they were not supposed to wear that particular type of clothing. And so we have many things going on here. Verse 122, Leviticus 19, verse 26, not practicing divination. This is like witchcraft stuff. And so we are to be completely separated from that, not supposed to do anything regarding witchcraft, magic, anything like that is considered evil. And we've already covered the verse about witches, in which this verse states, you shall not eat anything with the blood. That's something that the pagans were doing and would definitely be doing in witchcraft. Neither shall you use enchantment nor observe times. So these are people you go to do witchcraft things and to foretell, soothsay, all that stuff. is a no-go. God says don't do it. Number 123, Leviticus 19, verse 27, not shaving the temples or the sides of your head. Now, this is another one that gets misconstrued. If you look into the land of Israel today, you see a lot of Orthodox. They have these little curly cues on the sides of their head. And it's because they're taking this verse as literal without historical, cultural context. And this is a Canaanite mourning practice. So the Canaanites, when they lost a loved one, they would rip out hair, or they would rip out their beard, or they would cut their beard, and they would get tattoos for the dead, and they would put stuff on them. They would make cuts on their body to mourn the dead. And you can see it in tribal societies around the world. They're doing similar things like this. And we're not to do that. And this verse says, you shall not round the corners of your head, neither shall you mar the corners of your beard. And the verse that goes with this is for the dead. This is also the tattoo verse for the dead. So this is talking about the Canaanites' practice. So don't be doing that. It doesn't mean you can't shave your head, as long as you're not doing it for a dead person, someone that has passed away in mourning. I think you would be violating this verse if you did that because someone died. Number 124, Leviticus 19, verse 28, not to tattoo yourself, as is the manner of the idolaters. It's talking about the Canaanites. You shall not make any cuttings in your flesh for the dead, nor print any marks upon you. I am Yehovah, or Jehovah. So God is saying, don't be doing those Canaanite mourning practices for the dead. The whole context of those verses was for the dead. Number 125, Leviticus 19, verse 31, not to seek after familiar spirits and wizards. The verse states, regard not them that have familiar spirits, neither seek after wizards, to be defiled by them. I am Yehovah, your God, your Elohim. And so we're not to go be talking to people who claim to be talking to spirits and they can talk to people in the afterworld. They're not talking to people in the afterworld. They're talking to demons. They're talking to fallen angels, and they are being deceived. And any perceived miracles is by the help of those fallen angels. So yes, they can do things, but no, it is not real and true what's happening. Number 126, Leviticus 19, verse 32, on honoring the old and the wise. Now, this is very important because how you get ahead in life is you go to the people with experience. And the people with experience are the older people, and they can help you and they can develop you and give you shortcuts to life. So why wouldn't you go and use those resources? It's just amazing to me. People just say, oh, well, they don't know anything. I'm smarter than them. And I'm reminded of a Mark Twain quote, which I'm going to probably butcher this, but this is paraphrasing. When I was younger, I was amazed at how dumb my father was and how old he was. But then later, 7 years later, I was amazed at how much he had learned in those 7 years. And he was amazingly smart all of a sudden. No, it's just your perspective changed. Now you realize how smart he's always been. This verse in Leviticus, it states, you shall rise up before the honorary head and honor the face of the old man and fear your God. I am Yehovah, or Jehovah in English. So we are commanded to honor the old people. Number 127, Leviticus 19, verse 35, not cheating or defrauding with measurements and weights, in which it states, you shall do no unrighteousness in judgment, in measuring in length, weight, or capacity. So when you're making decisions or when you're deciding things, or even in judgments with judges, you are supposed to be fair and honest. You to have honest measurements, no cheating. I don't like this person, so I'm going to tip the scale. No, it's supposed to be equal justice. Number 128, Leviticus 19, verse 36. On the law of accurate weights and measures. Again, this is talking about measurements. So honest balances, honest weights, honest ephahs, that's a measurement. Ephah is 6.1 gallons. An honest hin, a hin is 1.5 gallons. Shall you have, I am Jehovah, or Jehovah, your God, your Elohim, which brought you out of the land of Egypt. So you are to have honest balances in everything you do. If you're measuring, you're giving stuff to people, and you say you're going to give them 1 ephah, you are to give them exactly 1 ephah. You're not to cheat them. Number 129, Leviticus 20, verse 14, on burning transgressors of certain commandments. And if a man takes a wife and her mother, it is wickedness. They shall be burnt with fire, both he and they, that there be no wickedness among you. So if a man is sleeping with his wife and her mother, so this is incest. And this particular thing is stating that you are to burn all 3 parties if they're guilty. And again, you have to have 2 witnesses. Number 130, Leviticus 20, verse 23. Imitate not the ways nor practice customs of idolaters, which it states, and you shall not walk in the manners of the nations, that's the goyim, which I cast out before you. For they committed all these things, and therefore I abhorred them. So we are to be set apart. We're supposed to be different. We're not to be like the rest of the world, the worldly. We're called out of this world. We live in this world, but we're not to be of this world. And so God makes that very clear. He wants us to be set apart. We're supposed to live a righteous life. Be righteous, for he is righteous. And how can we be righteous if we live exactly like the world and we live exactly like everyone else, doing what is evil? And now 131, Leviticus 22, verse 32, on sanctifying God's name. Now, God's name is mentioned in the Old Testament 6,827 times. His name is in all the places in which it's Lord in all caps for your English King James or New King James. And so God is using his name very much. We are told to use his name. We're supposed to greet each other in his name, bless each other in his name, and to swear oaths and make vows in his name. His name is very important. And also in Matthew, Jesus says, I have declared your name. And you can find it in some of the Hebrew Gospels. God's name is being used. And I have a whole teaching on God's name. Check that out. What God's name really is and how it became banned or propagandized as we can't use it. But this verse says, neither shall you profane my holy name. That means use it in a bad way. But I will be hallowed among the children of Israel. I am Jehovah, which hallowed you. So you are to use his name the way it's supposed to be used. Number 132, Leviticus 24, verse 16, not blaspheming the holy name of God, which it states, and he that blaspheme the name of Jehovah, he shall surely be put to death. and all the congregation shall certainly stone him, as well as the stranger, as he that is born in the land, when he blasphemes the name of Jehovah shall be put to death. Now, this actually happened. We have a recorded event where someone was blaspheming God's name. That means talking against the one and true God in a bad way, saying terrible things about him. And that is the Philistine known as Goliath. David slew Goliath. If you go back and read those verses, it says that he was blaspheming the name of Jehovah. So he was speaking bad things, using God's name and saying terrible things. And the Israelites were just standing there taking it. It was completely wrong. They should have been stepping up and executing what they're supposed to do. And so David hears this and he gets motivated to bring the punishment of blaspheming the holy name of God. And so the punishment is stoning. And as you recall, David took a stone and he stoned him in the head. David was used by God to execute Goliath for blaspheming the one and true God. Number 133, Leviticus 25, verse 14, on the law of buying and selling, which it states, and if you sell anything to your neighbor or buy anything from your neighbor, you shall not oppress one another. So you are to deal fairly with your neighbor when you make deals. Don't try to get over on them. Plus, remember, God is watching. Number 134, Leviticus 25, verse 17, not wronging, misleading one another, even verbally, which it states, you shall not therefore oppress one another, but you shall fear your God, for I am Jehovah, your Elohim. Do not oppress one another. Do not be tyrants. And that is across the board. It doesn't matter if you're husband, wife, doesn't matter if you're a supervisor over someone at a job, you are not to oppress people, period. Number 135, Leviticus 25, verse 37, not lending to one another, believers at interest, in which it states, you shall not give him your money upon usury, nor lend him your victuals for increase. So I use this in my life. If there is someone who is a believer and they're asking me for money or to borrow money, I'll either give them money outright and say, I don't want to be paid back for this, consider it a gift. Or I will say, here is some money. You pay me exactly this amount back. I don't want any interest. Number 136, Leviticus 26, verse 1, no figured stones to bow down to, in which it states, you shall make you no idols nor graven image, neither rear up a standing image, neither shall you set up any image of stone in your land to bow down to it, for I am Jehovah, your God. In which it's talking about you're not to erect anything in the means of worship. You're not to erect stones, carvings, wood carvings, any type of animals, birds, fish, whatever, in some sort of fashion to bow down or do rituals or to do ceremonies. Any of that stuff is against God's commandments. Number 37, Numbers 15, verse 38, on making tzitzits with thread of blue garments of the corners, in which it states, speak unto the children of Israel and bid them that they make them fringes and the borders of their garments throughout their generations, and that they put upon the fringe of their borders a riband of blue. So this is called the tzitzit, and in the time of Christ, they ended up being strings, but prior to that, the ancient Israelites was a fringe at the end of the cloth, all around the whole entire cloth. And you can see this more in pillows today, the kind of fringe, and it's supposed to be with blue, and they also use white. But what this was your blanket. It was the thing that kept you warm. You used it as a prayer shawl, you used it to sleep in. It was an outer garment. And so it wasn't something that you worked in your everyday use. It was something that you carried, and it was very important. It's not your tunic, it was your outer garment, which was a blanket. And so Christ actually had healing in his tzitzit. There's a lady that reached out and grabbed the tzitzit, and she was healed of her bleeding issue. And so this is something Christ had. And so I actually have a talit, I have a prayer shawl. This is the same thing. And so that's how I fulfill it. That's what they used in the ancient times, was the prayer shawl. And Paul was making prayer shawls and traveling around teaching God's words. So people continued on after Jesus to have these prayer shawls. It's very biblical to have one, and they're to have tzitzits on them. Now you might see some modern day Jews wearing tzitzits on their outfits, and it's just not matching up historically what they use tzitzits for, but it is a reminder of God. And so this is just like a keychain, a physical reminder that God is around and to remember God. And so I don't hold anything against wearing it on all kinds of things, whatever keeps you reminded that God is with you. Number 138, Numbers 19, verse 13, the law of purification, water of sprinkling, in which it states, whosoever touches the dead body of a man that is dead and purifies not himself, defiles the tabernacle of Jehovah, and that soul shall be cut off from Israel, because the water of separation was not sprinkled upon him. He shall be unclean. His uncleanliness is upon him. And so this verse, part of it cannot be fulfilled because it's talking about you cannot go up to the temple, you can't go to the tabernacle if you're unclean. But this is dealing with a man touching a dead body, and so you are unclean. In general, this verse can be applied to you because if you find a dead body, you touch a dead body of a man, you are unclean until you have cleaned yourself, you have washed yourself. And so you're not to be running around touching a bunch of stuff, because you touch a dead body, you might be passing around diseases and you might get sick yourself. So you want to make sure that you go and clean yourself. Number 139, Numbers 19, verse 14, uncleanliness of a human corpse, in which it states, this is the law when a man dies in a tent or a house, all that comes into the tent and all that is in the tent shall be unclean 7 days. So you are to wait it out. There's a period where a dead body was in there and we don't know, is it safe? Should people go in there? No, people should not go in there. You should clean it and you should keep as many people out of there. Number 140, Numbers 27, verse 8, on the law of inheritance. And you shall speak to the children of Israel, saying, if a man die and have no sons, then you shall cause his inheritance to pass unto his daughter. So, women can get an inheritance, and they should get an inheritance if there is no firstborn male or male at all. And so this is something that was not done And the ancient Israelites violated this. A lot of times they just did not do things like this, which they should have. Number 141, Numbers 30, verse 2. Not to break your word, even if without an oath, in which it states, if a man vow a vow unto Jehovah, or swear an oath to bind his soul with a bond, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. So this is very important. A man is only as good as his word. And this is a cultural thing that we have here in the United States. You have to stick by your word. It's honorable. It means everything. All you have is your physical body and your word. Number 142, Numbers 30, verse 4, but we need verse 3 for the context. Not to break your word, even without an oath, in which it states in verse 3, or if a woman makes a vow to Jehovah and binds herself by some agreement while in her father's house in her youth, in verse 4, and her father hears the vow and the agreement by which she has bound herself, and her father holds his peace, then all her vows shall stand, and every agreement with which she has bound herself shall stand. So if a woman makes a vow and she's living under her father's house, she's the daughter of the father in the house, the head of the household, and he hears her vow and he does not cancel it out, he is basically agreeing with it, and it is standing against her. She has to hold up her deal, so to speak. But this will change. In 143, Numbers 30, verse 5, the father can overrule the vow of the young lady, which it states, but if her father overrules her on the day that he hears, then none of her vow nor her agreements by which she has bound herself shall stand, and Jehovah will release her because her father overruled her. So let's say she's a young lady, she doesn't know what she's doing, she's making some kind of vow that is too much and impossible, or something that she can't actually hold up her bargain, and the father hears it and he knows this is not a good vow for her. He can overrule it and release her. And so this is why it's so important to have the head of the household. He is supposed to be in charge, watching. He's supposed to be the high priest of the home. And you're going to see that that will fall on his head in the end. The woman needs a protector. They need a leader. And the weaker vessel needs someone to lead them and protect them and keep them safe. And so God has appointed man to be the representative of the family, and all the responsibility falls on him if anything goes wrong. So you'll see that. 144, Numbers 30, verse 7, the husband is in charge of the woman's vow. And this is talking about a married couple, not a daughter, in which it states, and her husband hears it and makes no response to her on the day that he hears it, then her vow shall stand, and her agreements by which she has bound herself shall stand. So if a husband hears the wife's vow on the day that he heard it, and he does not say anything, or he doesn't cancel it out, then that vow will stand, and she has to honor it. Number 145, Numbers 30, verse 8, on that a judge can annul vows only according to the Torah, which it states, but if her husband disavowed her on that day that he heard it, then he shall make her vow which she vowed, and that which she uttered with her lips, wherewith she bound her soul, none effect, and Jehovah shall forgive her. So it's on the day that he heard it. So if he hears the vow, he has that day to change it or to annul it or to cancel it out. If he doesn't do that, then that vow is going to stand. If he does nothing, then that vow is good and it's on her to fulfill that vow. Number 146, Numbers 30, verse 9, widowed woman's and divorced woman's vow, in which it states, also any vow of a widow or a divorced woman by which she has bound herself shall stand against her. So if she makes a vow and she's living on her own, she doesn't have a husband to cancel out her vows will stand. If she's a divorced woman living by herself, her vows will stand against her. So she better be smart in making her vows, because she doesn't have someone watching out for her and someone who's going to take responsibility for her vow. Number 147, Numbers 30, verse 11, and we need 10, verse 10 for context. Married women and husbands' vows / oaths, in which it states in verse 10, if she vowed in her husband's house or bound herself by an agreement with an oath, using God's name, of course. Verse 11, and her husband hear it and made no response to her and did not overrule her, then all her vows shall stand, and every agreement by which she was bound herself shall stand. So this is in the house. A husband is hearing the vow and he doesn't do anything. Again, it stands on her to fulfill it. Some of these kind of feel like they're redundant, but there are slight details that are added each time. Number 148, Numbers 30, verse 12, married women and husbands' vow / oath, in which it states, but if her husband truly made them void on the day he heard them, then whatever proceeds from her lips concerning her vows or concerning the agreement binding her, it shall not stand. Her husband has made void, and the Lord will release her. So, again, this is a husband who has made void her agreement with God. So the husband has overruling powers for her vows, her oaths, and her agreements. And so I don't think he's supposed to go around canceling everything she does. That would be a tyrant, which we've already saw. You're not to oppress, but you are to watch out for your wife and make sure that she doesn't do something that she might regret later. Number 149, Numbers 30, verse 13, married woman and husband vow and oaths, in which it states every vow and every binding oath to affect her soul, her husband may confirm it, or her husband may make it void. And so he could also say, yes, I agree with this. This is a great oath that you made, my dear. Or he can cancel it out. This is just a verse affirming God's protocol on the husband and wife oath making. Number 150, Numbers 30, verse 14, married woman and husband's oaths / vows, in which it states, now if her husband makes no response whatsoever to her from day to day, then he confirms all her vows and all the agreements that bind her. He confirms them because he made no response to her on the day that he heard them. So he is supposed to do it on the day that he hears them. means he's to take action right away. He's not to put it off or think about it too long and like, oh, well, let me sleep on it a few days. No, he's supposed to take action, be vigilant, be on the ball of the overseer and watcher of his love of his life. So that is to happen. But this is the most important part. The natural order of things is God over Christ, Christ over man, man over woman, woman over children. And that is very clear in the Bible. And so 151, Numbers 30, verse 15, it states, but if he does not make them void, it means he doesn't cancel out her oaths after he hear them, then he shall bear her guilt. So if she makes a vow, oath or agreement with God using God's name, and she doesn't hold up her bargain, and he did not cancel it out, he didn't make it void, then he shall bear her guilt. The husband or the father will be responsible for her not fulfilling that oath, vow, or agreement with God. It goes to the representative of the household, the leader of the family, the high priest of the family. He shall be guilty that she did not keep her oath. 152, Numbers 35, verse 12, not killing a murderer without trial and conviction, in which it states, and they shall be unto you cities for refuge from the avenger, that the manslayer die not until he stand before the congregation in judgment. So there's a couple things here going on. So I think this actually should still happen, cities of refuge, where if someone accidentally kills somebody in city A, there needs to be a city B that person could go to and start anew. But before that accidental killer, not murderer, killer, because he accidentally killed someone, that person needs to go and have a trial. He needs to go before the congregation. He needs to go before the judge, and it needs to be settled out that this was an accident. And then that person should go to a city of refuge where he can start over, start anew. He can't live in the same neighborhood, see the same people, because that is tempting for people to avenge the death. 153, Numbers 35, verse 30, a witness must not sit as a judge in a capital case, in which it states, whoever kills any person, the murderer shall be put to death by the mouth of witnesses. And you have to have 2 or 3 witnesses. But one witness shall not testify against any person to cause him to die. It's a minimum of 2 people, sometimes 3 in certain cases. So you cannot execute the death penalty with just having 1 witness. 154, Numbers 35, verse 31, not to feel good about a death penalty, in which it states, moreover, you shall take no ransom for the life of a murderer who is guilty of death, but he shall surely be put to death. It's a very solemn, sad thing. This person broke the law, took a life. They're acting in a very evil way, and it's not a good thing. Death entered the world because of Satan, because of the fall. And so this is just another sin rippling across the universe of what Adam has done and what Eve has done. And so we are not to celebrate, we are not to get excited that someone is being put to death, although we are to do the death penalty. I know people out there, they protest against the death penalty. It is very biblical. If someone murders someone, 2 witnesses testify, that person is found guilty, he is to be put to death. That will be our last one. And I really appreciate everybody joining me for this series. I hope this is really helpful, and I hope this is impacting your life. At the end of this, we're going to land on a number of how many apply to the average person, and really excited to get to that number and show you that the list of numbers of commandments that apply to you is much more easier, simpler than what man has created, government laws have created, and that God has made these things very easy and simple for you for a reason, to protect you, to keep you safe, and to love your neighbor and love God Almighty. And so God has made it an easy life, easy path. His yoke is easy and light, and it's man that has put all the stumbling blocks, put all the barriers up, and added the extra weight on people's backs. So we're to get back to what Moses said to do. It's very simple, very easy. The burden is light. And that's the point of teaching you all of these commandments, so that you can see for yourself that these have not been done away with, and these have very specific reasons why they are in the Bible, because they're there to help you. With that being said, I want to say thank you to all my listeners out there, all the subscribers. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment below, hit the bell notification, and share out these videos, and check out some of my other videos out there. There's a lot of information I've laid out and teachings, especially all the history stuff. And we're going to do a lot more in the future. So thank you for joining me, and God bless.